Hello and welcome back to Alternate Ending, where we are still discovering good movies, one bad movie at a time. I am your host for this week, which is the first main feed episode of July. I am Brennan Klein, and with me are two voices that, I get the faces, I'm very lucky, but you get the voices, ones that will be familiar to you. First up, we have Brian Fowler. How you doing today, Brian?
Hot, but otherwise, I'm alive.
Excellent. I'm very happy to hear that. And it is July. If it's not hot, we're not doing it right. You know, at least in North America, in Northern Hemisphere. And we also have, speaking of not in North America, Andrew Milne. How are you doing, Andrew?
I'm doing good, thanks, Brennan. I'm wet, but I'm still alive, in contrast to the rest of you guys. No, we've managed to be spared the heat wave that's engulfing the rest of the northern hemisphere because we're stalwarts that way. We don't we have a brand and we need to upkeep
it. Well, I'm happy to hear about your consistency, if nothing else.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, I'm really excited to have both of you on today. We are going to be talking about, Superman in the cinema and probably the other places he exists that feed into the cinema. But before that, we're going to do our regular movie roundtable. Andrew, did I interrupt you? Do you have something you were going to say?
No, not at all. No, I'm happy to get into it.
I'm sorry to just throw the ball, but yeah, did you have a movie you wanted to bring to the roundtable today?
I did. I saw a couple of things that I was, just a couple of classics that I caught up on in the last couple of weeks. Been kind of busy coming back from holiday and moving house, but I did find time to get a couple of Blu-rays that I've been coveting for a while now. And the one that I want to bring to the table today is, again, staying on brand for me. It's a 1989 movie from Hong Kong. And
what?
It's different from the last one, I swear. I promise. There's a very different texture and tone to this one.
Okay, and what is it? Tell us about it.
So the movie I'm talking about this evening is titled "My Heart Is That Eternal Rose." You know how I like a good florid title.
Yeah, it's almost giving Italian at that point.
Almost, yeah. Like it has that sort of energy to it in places. So this is a feature. It was long coveted by a lot of fans of Hong Kong cinema, from what I understand. It's only in the last year that it's really received a good plush Blu-ray release, together with another film, Nomad. I got a sort of double feature package. So this is from the director Patrick Tam. He is known as sort of a luminary of the Hong Kong New Wave, this sort of cadre of directors that took up residence in Hong Kong around pretty much the length of the 80s, right up until the sort of the handover in 1997. It was, he's kind of lost prominence in the West since he was active. He's not the most prolific director in the world. I think he's only made something like 8 features over the course of his life. He's probably most significantly known as a protege and actually a mentor of Wong Kar-wai. He was an editor on a couple of Wong Kar-wai's films, notably Ashes of Time and Days of Being Wild, I think there were. So watching My Heart Is That Eternal Rose, it's quite a distinctive proposition because it feels almost exactly in the middle between a John Woo movie and a Wong Kar-wai film, where it has sort of the action of the former and the sort of the vibes and the lighting and the sort of sensuality of the latter. The gist is contemporary set film. It's a couple of young lovers who get caught up in a heist or a crime that goes wrong. They are forcibly separated after they get in bad with some gangsters. The guy whose name is Rick has to be essentially sent into exile in the Philippines to get away from the guys who are chasing him, and his girlfriend, fiancée ideally, who is named Lam, is essentially indebted to the gangsters who saved her life. Flash forward 6 years, and they cross each other's paths again, and it's sort of this rekindling romance set against the backdrop of this internecine gang warfare. And there's also a love triangle involving a third party, and the third party, the hypotenuse of the love triangle, is played by Tony Leung, little babyface Tony
Hey.
Leung, who's always great to see. Um, so, as I say, this is one I've had an eye on. It's been in my watch list for a long time now. I really grooved with it. I mean, I don't need to tell you that. Like, I'm such a mark for this kind of style of this genre and this style of direction. But I thought it was
You
really
don't say.
beautiful. Yeah, yeah, 100%. I thought it was really beautiful. I thought it was really sensual. I thought it's not really an action movie. Is the interesting thing. It has a couple of gunfight sequences and they're really well shot, but they're also not really a point of emphasis. The emphasis is all on sort of the young love and the sort of yearning and the wistfulness, and the sort of gangster movie tropes are used as just a way of buttressing all that. And there's a lot of really striking images, a lot of very impressionistic textures, great use of lighting, great cinematography throughout, very cantopop-led score. I just love the texture of stuff like this, and it's very much a vibes movie. It's a mood movie, and it's worth seeking out on that basis, I would say.
No, that does sound really interesting. As I believe we discussed last time we talked about a Hong Kong movie, I'm underseen on Hong Kong action, but I've seen quite a bit of horror, especially from the 80s
Yeah.
from that region. And one of my favorite things that a Hong Kong movie can do is that kind of genre drift thing where it's just like they
Mm.
can't quite keep their hands on the ball of a single genre for a whole movie. So there's always something kind of fun and exciting around the next corner, or at least that I've experienced.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
when you talk about horror, like the first thing my mind goes to is something like The Boxer's Omen or Seeding of a Ghost or movies like those. Are you familiar with either of those?
I'm not. I mean, my inroad into many a regional and historical cinema is the slasher genre.
Naturally.
Um, so yeah, that's kind of mostly where I get it. But I've seen slasher movies where it's about like kung fu cops, and there's also a romantic
Mm.
comedy shoved in, and there's just like it can be a lot of fun.
Yeah,
What I've
they're
seen.
very free and easy with sort of variation between tone and texture. I think also because films from this era they're all dubbed necessarily because actors are speaking different dialects, so it has this sort of floaty, almost surreal by default kind of quality and texture to it that I find really beguiling in the same way that I do Italian movies. So, but this is a really plush film. It's really really well filmed. The cinematographer is actually an English guy, I think, Christopher Doyle, who's got these really really lovely lighting setups in all the nighttime scenes. He's using this really aggressive soft focus where the whole film essentially looks like a neon light. All the sort of surfaces are sort of bleeding over their edges, and it has this incredible. It's like you're living inside a nostalgic memory. It's a very particular sort of aesthetic.
So, would you say this is a good movie for people who don't have a deep knowledge of Hong Kong cinema, or is this more of a for the sickos type?
No, no, I think this is actually pretty accessible. I think because it isn't particularly hyperbolic. Actually, it's a lot more delicate. It's a lot more nuanced than you tend to get from other films of this era. Yeah, I would say
Yeah,
this is a pretty good inroad, if anything.
because I'm very much a novice when it comes to Hong Kong cinema. Although I keep getting emails lately from Shout Factory about their new Hong Kong Cinema Classics line, and I
There's a
was just
reason for
looking at
that.
the new. Yeah, they just bought that weird library that was owned by a hotel or whatever
Yeah, the
for years.
Golden
It's a weird
Princess.
story.
That was such a strange story. This shipping company, like it was as I understand, it was the parent company of Golden Princess who produced a bunch of classics in the 90s. Their film division shuttered, and since then, like nobody was able to get in contact with them to sort of renew the rights to distribution outside of China, which had lapsed. And it's only just this year that impasse was finally resolved, which is a huge coup
Yeah,
for cinephiles. Honestly, so much of
yeah.
these films have
Like,
languished in obscurity for far too long.
yeah, yeah. Earlier today, I was looking at they and just said it's coming out next month or this month, I guess now it's July. Um, Peking Opera Blues. which I have not seen, but looks fascinating.
Oh, I've not seen that one either. No, I need to catch up with that.
Yeah.
Well, yeah,
I
no,
don't know if
yeah.
I was gonna say I don't know if Shout's ships overseas or not, but
I don't believe so. I think there are usually equivalent releases in the PAL regions, so to speak.
okay.
But those barriers have increasingly broken down over the last couple of decades. Thankfully, fingers crossed.
Well, yeah, no, that's good to hear. All movies should belong to all people.
Amen.
Yeah. Speaking of other movies, Brian, what are you bringing to the table for the round table today?
So the truth is, I have not watched very many movies in the last few weeks because I've
Okay.
been busy. A, I've been busy, and B, I've been finally fallen into the hole that is House of the Dragon.
Oh, okay.
Oh, cool.
But I did. The last movie I saw in a theater was Materialists, and I hated it.
Oh, people have been very divided on this movie.
I hated it. I hated every single character in this movie. I just wanted them all to stop talking and never start again. So I don't have a lot to say beyond that. I mean, it's competently shot and framed, and it's aware that its protagonist is unlikable. It's not like, oh, we messed up. She was supposed to be beloved. But it just doesn't work for me on any level.
Okay. Have you seen Past Lives, and did you like that?
I have not.
Okay.
Every time I hear Past Lives, I just think of the Black Sabbath live album. So
Right there
Yeah,
with
no,
you.
I've seen neither. I mean, I haven't seen Materialists either. The thing that I know better than to be tempted into a movie because it has a good press tour, especially when Dakota Johnson is at the center of that press tour, because I find her to be a complete delight and like just a baffling presence in so many ways.
she is a much better press tour presence than she is an actress. And this
Yeah, I
has been
don't know.
consistently true.
I don't know if I would want to rubber stamp that necessarily, but you're probably right. But I find her very compelling just to exist around. But everything else about the movie seemed kind of poisonous to the things that I find interesting. And I love a rom-com, but I know that's not really what it's doing, is what I've heard at least.
No, it has the structure in a lot of ways of a rom-com, but there's not many jokes. And one of the subplots gets very, very heavy. So it's not like a light, frothy, oh, these people, there's a love triangle. Yay, it was so fun. It's too heavy, and the character is not likable enough to root for.
Yeah, that's tough. And it I guess that extra sucks because Chris Evans deserves like kind of a big triumphant return to the rom-com.
And I mean, he's not bad in the movie. The character's sorry. Pedro Pascal's also not bad in the movie, but
yeah, I mean he's not bad at anything, but I've said my piece about Pedro Pascal.
He's the most likable character in the movie, and he's the private equity billionaire. So my problem is the movies start there and snowball the rest of the way down.
Yeah, maybe I've been skipping this one, and I think I will continue to. Andrew, have you caught up with Materialists, or are you going to?
I have not. I've been bad actually. Like I've been seeing a bunch of esoteric stuff on home video, but I've not been out to the cinema in a while. Just life stuff. So when I do get out, it is not going to be my first priority to catch up with. I've still got to see 28 Years Later. I've still got to see Ballerina. I've still got to see Megan 2.0, and those are all sort of further up the chain.
Maybe don't have to see the last one.
Oh, fair. Okay. I've been
No,
seeing
I mean,
I've been seeing it's not
Ballerina's.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say Ballerina's definitely up your alley, though.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, but we all knew that, like, to start with. So
well, yes, it was not a shocking development, but I enjoyed Ballerina quite a bit, despite some real problems with the how the plot fits.
Yeah, but like I wasn't super high on Past Lives. I remember thinking it was fine when I saw it. I've talked to a couple of our mutual acquaintances about how it represents the experience of sort of the Asian diaspora. One of whom like was very high on it, the other not so much. And it was I don't know, I just remember feeling it was kind of anodyne, like just from my perspective. And all of the notes I've been hearing about Materialists sort of make it sound like it's in the same boat. Like it's just kind of glassy and a bit coffee table and a bit like it's not really committing very hard to a single register. And I don't know, I'm sure it's very tasteful and well shot and well acted and what have you, but it just I like to have movies with a bit of piss and vinegar in them, and it doesn't occur to me that that's the case here.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it. But yes, well, speaking of your list of movies, first of all, go with God if you choose to go see Megan 2. That's a great thing, and people do like Megan 2. I did not like Megan 2. The thing that I would push people to see, which is the movie that I'm bringing today to the round table, is 28 Years Later. I'm not going to spoil anything. I actually wasn't planning on talking about the plot at all, because it's 28 years later. It's rage virus. It's the third one. There's zombies in the British Isles. That's kind of what we're looking at. It's not shocking. But I mean, I designed a whole 3 months of Bride of Alternate Ending to kind of be leading into the release of 28 Years Later. So of course I was going to be like their opening weekend.
True enough, I hadn't even clocked that was the association between Fast Zombies Month.
Yeah, baby. No, I love Fast Zombies. My favorite movie of all time is Wreck, the Spanish movie. And I love zombies in general, so I was definitely going to go see this. I think, yeah, so it's Danny Boyle and Alex Garland have returned as director and screenwriter, respectively, after making the first one and skipping out on the second one. It's been since 2007 that we've had any installment in this franchise, and I think both of the previous movies are good in their own way. This one I found to be very interesting. I think when you put Danny Boyle and Alex Garland together, they're going to kind of fuck around and find out and just see what they can do.
Yeah.
And some of those things work very well, and some of those things, I don't think anything fails to work about the movie. Some of the things I'm just ambivalent toward. Like, obviously the first movie is shot on the grossest digital kind of handheld DV cameras you can find, and I kind of despise the aesthetic of that first movie, even though I get
480p, as I only just recently learned, which is wild to me in hindsight.
No, it is an ugly movie, very intentionally so. And this one, there's a lot of ballyhoo about, it was shot on the iPhone 15, and it's very clear that they were trying to recapture that idea, but I don't think that comes through aesthetically at all, which is fine with me. I thought it was a beautiful movie. I liked looking at it, and that is a huge improvement to me from 28 Days Later. I think I would warn people to... I think that like any horror movie trailer, the trailer is very well cut, and I would warn people to maybe anticipate a drama, on the lines of the first movie. That first movie is very much about how are we going to try and hold society together as it is crumbling, more than it is about being chased by fast zombies. And this new movie has similar intentions, even though I think that both sides of the horror and drama coin work very well. It maybe leans drama heavily enough that I'm not certain it'll have a lot of rewatch value for me. Because if a movie is more of a straight drama, once I get the story, I'm like, yeah, I saw it. I don't need to see it again. So I'm curious if I'll be itching to rewatch it in a year or so. Certainly because by that point, 28 years later, The Bone Temple will have already come out, because it's set to debut in January.
How heavily is it invested in setting up being the first movie of a new trilogy versus just being a third movie in an existing franchise?
Yeah, so that's something that I was very worried about going into the movie. And I think it exists in both spaces quite well. I think it tells a complete story, and then, without giving anything away, there is there's a button that's okay, there's going to be another thing, but it's not leaving you feeling dissatisfied with the story that has been told to you. Okay. It does have a beginning and a middle and an end. It does have a complete arc, even though it is okay, we're gonna go on and do more of this in 6 months.
Because that was my big concern since they announced. I was like, ooh, they're finally doing a new 28 Days Later movie. What do you mean a trilogy?
Yeah, no, and just like all pre-announced trilogies, I think that third movie is gonna never get made. I don't think it's gonna happen. 28 Years Later is doing pretty well financially, but I don't think it's doing well enough that The Bone Temple coming hot on its heels is also going to do well enough. I just feel like we're going to fall off.
Yeah.
But anyway, I see a lot of divisiveness about 28 Years Later in terms of certain things about the way that it's presented. There's a very unique non-diegetic element that I felt like I fully just understood in my bones from like the second it was going on, but I feel like a lot of people have some issues with it, but I really liked it. I thought it was kind of experimental and interesting. And there's great performances. Ralph Fiennes, A+. Like
So I've heard.
and the young debut star Alfie Williams is really good. And one thing that I think is maybe a demerit for American audiences, but it is an unrepentantly British film. Like it is very interested in the history and culture of Britain in a way that is a little alienating if you might need to do some Wikipediaing afterward.
So I've been given to understand, like, because one of the takes I've been seeing floating around is that it is a Brexit movie, which like that seems like a fairly easy read on the material. Does that track?
That's interesting. I would have to look into what the arguments for that are. I think it's easy to read any movie as a Brexit movie.
Kind of. Yeah.
To me, that's not what it felt like, but I'm not like inundated in day-to-day British politics. So maybe I just didn't naturally pick up on that, but I picked up on plenty of things that I found very interesting. And I researched further things and I was like, oh yeah, I was kind of building connections. And I think I found it to be a very rewarding movie to watch. I really liked it, even though it wasn't necessarily what I was expecting.
Yeah. The one thing, because I have not seen it yet, but I have been spoiled on it, unfortunately.
Okay.
And one thing
Let's not spoil it for anyone else, but yeah.
So yeah, like I won't spoil it for anyone else, but there is a reckoning with a British public figure, as I understand it, whose legacy would have been understood very differently if Britain had been overtaken by a zombie apocalypse in 2002. And that is
Yes.
that is an interesting and offbeat and weird way to sort of push the fiction of the 28 Days Later universe. I have to say, like, I'm kind of curious to see where that goes.
I would be very curious to hear your thoughts on if you would make that connection, because I see a lot of people making that connection, and I can see a lot of reasons why, but no one has ever been able to. No one writing about it has adequately explained the specifics of what they are seeing that brings out that element. And I'm just like, I don't know if the connection is 100% there.
Maybe.
I need someone on the ground to tell me who knows what they're talking about.
Because in fairness, I think it also might have been kind of before my time, so I'm not sure I'm necessarily the person to authoritatively speak about it. But also, we're sort of talking in spoiler of our circles at this moment, so we should probably just move past it.
Yeah, we should move past it, and we shall. We are going to dive into our topic, which is Superman. You have already heard. Were either of you two on the July preview episode? I don't recall.
No, but I did listen. So
okay, well,
so
great.
Caleb and Gavin.
Yeah. You heard them talk about Superman a bit, and we are obviously kind of angling this around the fact that the James Gunn Superman movie is impending. We're not here to specifically talk about that as much as Superman as a whole on the screen. This is a topic that was brought to us by Brian, and I'm curious, what made you want to talk about this, and are you excited about that new movie?
I am cautiously optimistic about the new movie, which is to say I'm far more excited than anybody who was on the preview episode. But I have in the past described Superman as a sacred object to me. And I will pretty much stand by that. I think he is the most important pop culture figure created in the 20th century in the English language.
Oh.
I will go to bat for that at any point. I don't want to turn this episode into a debate about that topic, but I firmly believe that.
Well, I mean, if we are throwing out, I do believe that the most important character in Western literature is the evil German scientist Dr. Mittenhand in Leprechaun in Space.
Okay, okay, so second place for Superman.
Yeah,
I
okay.
can see that one. And if you have not seen Leprechaun in Space,
Why the
Don't.
only
we'll
one?
just leave it at that.
Why the only one on the show who hasn't seen Leprechaun in Space?
You're
Yes.
the only one on the show who hasn't seen all 8 Leprechaun movies.
Oh, good lord!
Anyway,
we're
sorry.
the sickos here. Sorry.
Yep.
Well,
It's all good.
anyway, there was something specifically said on the podcast, on the preview podcast, the last episode, well, 2 episodes ago, that I just, not in an argumentative way, I just want to point out, somebody said, I can't remember who it was out of the 3, but it might have been Caleb, said that they were sick of cape shit, as a reference to superhero movies, which, totally valid opinion. There have been way too many superhero movies. But I find it fascinating, that phrase, cape. Because start thinking about the superheroes that show up in movies. You got Superman, Batman, then Spider-Man, Iron Man, Wonder Woman, Flash, Aquaman, Captain America, etc., etc. How many actually wear capes?
Not many. I see what you're going at here. Yeah, it's like capes aren't actually that prevalent, but
Yep.
cape has been used as a sort of synecdoche for superheroes,
Right.
simply because
You
Superman
draw-
is that.
Yeah, if you tell somebody, draw a generic superhero, it's going to look a lot more like Superman than anything else by most people.
That's true. And I mean, I just believe that modern superheroes have been listening to Edna Mode from The Incredibles. They've been paying attention to history.
Damn you, Brennan, that was my next line.
Was it really?
No capes. But yes, that is absolutely where I was trying to go. Because you can't bring that up and not bring up Edna Mode.
I think about her every day.
But it was something that might be starting to be a bit of a thing I do on this podcast. If anyone who listened to last week's Your Movie Rocks will know, I'm going to do a really brief history of a comic book here. I promise
Okay.
only a couple of minutes here. But in April of 1938, Action Comics #1 by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster was published. It was the first appearance of the character Superman. And very quickly, Superman went from page to screen, because in September of 1941 was the first of 9 short films animated films made by Fleischer Studios that ran through August of 1942. And during those cartoons, which, have either of you watched the Fleischer cartoons?
No. I was actually going to raise this, actually. I was trying to track what Superman's first screen performance was, and the first live-action appearance, I believe, was 1948, with the Kirk
Correct.
Allen
Yep.
serials.
The first of the 2 Kirk Allen serials, yep.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
and
his
sorry.
first on-screen appearance is... Oh, shoot, I forgot the name of the cartoon. 1 second. It's just called Superman.
Great.
The first
And
cartoon's just called Superman.
just to answer your question as well, I will say you'll be shocked to learn that I have also not seen this this ancient cartoon. But that was something that I was very excited about coming into this podcast, is because I have seen almost nothing of Superman. I am very basic as far as my existence relative to Superman, and I thought this was my opportunity to be the carry on the podcast, which I've never really been before. So I was really excited to take that position.
All right.
With you.
Did either of you watch Batman the Animated Series? The 90s cartoon?
Intermittently, not comprehensively, but yes.
No.
Okay. You really are the carry this week.
Oh, for sure. Wait, so Neil Patrick Harris played a character called the Music Meister on some show, but that was not the 90s one, I imagine, right? That was later?
That is Batman the Brave and the Bold.
Okay, I have seen those clips of that episode, and that's about as far as I've gotten with animated Batman.
All right. The Batman the Animated Series has a very distinct style that's often referred to as dark deco.
Because my understanding is that the big innovation of Batman the Animated Series was that it was animated on black sheets of paper. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes. But a lot of the style, the way the buildings look, is heavily influenced by those Fleischer and then later famous studio Superman cartoons, which I'm not going to get into the history of Fleischer Studios and famous studios, but in 1942, Fleischer Studios kind of sort of became Famous Studios. And they did a further 8 Superman cartoons through July of 1943. And one of the things that's fascinating is if you watch the early Fleischer cartoons, Superman doesn't fly.
Huh.
He leaps over tall buildings in a single bound.
Yeah, that
I
was
have heard that he does this.
That was like was that a Silver Age innovation that he was able to fly?
No, that is actually from the Fleischer cartoons.
Oh.
At one point, the animators were like, it would look a lot better if he just flew instead of jumping everywhere.
Yeah.
And that is where Superman learned to fly. It's like, well, why not? He's an alien. He can do anything else. Why can't he fly too? But because if you know the famous tagline, the faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive, able to leap tall buildings in a single bound, up in the sky, it's a bird, it's a plane, it's Superman!
Yeah.
Yada, yada, yada. I could actually do the whole thing, but I'm not going to.
There's more? That's all I know.
Yes! Oh no, it keeps going. Who is this strange visitor from another world who disguises mild-mannered reporter Clark Kent, fights a never-ending battle for truth, justice, and the American way.
Does it talk about Clark Kent's Gen Z fringe?
No, it does not.
I like how you sort to drift into a sort of 40s mid-Atlantic accent as you do that, Brian.
It's what it's supposed to be, isn't it?
100%, yes. No, like that was a compliment, to be clear.
Yeah. But they're basically action cartoon shorts. Superman fights mad scientists, Nazis, Japanese soldiers, everything that you would expect an American hero to be fighting in the early to mid 1940s. They are very, very good, and I do recommend watching them. And then Andrew just mentioned a bit, but the next time Superman shows up on screen is in 1948, and again in 1950 in a pair of movie serials, 15-part serials called. First one's called Superman. Second one is called Atom Man versus Superman.
Atom Man versus Superman. Okay, cool.
And I have not seen either of these, so I'm just going to move on from them because I know nothing about them.
So my thing is, I'm always quite cognizant that Tim runs a tight ship when it comes to this podcast branding. Like, this is a movie podcast, not a TV podcast. And I'm not quite sure where, serials, like 1940s style serials fit into that paradigm. But
that is 100% cinema. That is on the big screen, baby. That is not television. That is before television was invented.
Okay, good. So
it's very much the forerunner to television.
Okay, sure. So the Kirk Allen serials count, but it is notable, I think, to point out that in 1951, the first ever feature superhero film was released, and it's Superman and the Mole Man. It's 58 minutes long. It is a backdoor pilot to the George Reeves television show, and it isn't very good.
It is definitely not very good. It has been a long time since I watched it. I briefly considered rewatching it before this podcast. Then I remembered how not very good it is.
Yeah.
But I remember enough. Plus, nobody's ever seen it, and then Andrew went and watched it this week.
Yeah, I've been trying to circumvent you, Brian. I've been trying to sort of like dig underneath your like a mole, as it were.
Now, the interesting thing about that is you mentioned it's kind of a backdoor pilot. Hit theaters a few months before the TV show premiered. But then the last 2 episodes of the first season of The Adventures of Superman are edited down because they're only 26-minute episodes. But it is Superman and the Mole Men cut down to fit into a 2-parter that somehow managed to cut out every single time the phrase Mole Men or Mole Man is said. They're not mole men in this. They're just creatures from beneath the earth.
Oh my god.
But it does have something I like about Superman that I don't think has shown up much in the films, which is that he's not just an action hero. He's also a moral arbitrator. And he comes not to defeat the evil monsters from under the earth. He comes to stop the fearful humans from killing the poor creatures that have emerged from under the earth.
Oh.
And I do like that about it. I wish it was a more interesting movie to make that point with.
Yeah, it's kind of giving The Day the Earth Stood Still.
It is giving a little bit the
Yes,
Dare
but-
still, actually. Yeah, that's a
But
good
worse than the
comparison point.
Keanu Reeves remake.
Well, those are some hard words.
It is a bad movie. There is no getting around it. It is a bad movie.
Okay, I mean, very good to know. I before we leave film serial land, I do want to say I actually kind of resent the Superman and Batman film serials because I think those two are probably the reason that anyone in the modern day who's not a film scholar knows about film serials. Because if you're looking into like, oh, I want to watch all the Batman movies, and you look at a list, you're like, oh, what the fuck is this? What is a serial? Do I get to eat it in my breakfast? No, it is a series of short films that played in theaters. But like, I feel like those are the serials you hear about. It's Superman, it's Batman, it's Tarzan,
Flash Gordon,
yeah, etc. But some of the biggest film serials of the day were about women. Like you still got stuff like The Perils of Pauline and other things like that were hugely popular that nobody talks about anymore and still never come up. And I'm just like, we are once again erasing women from the conversation about cinema. But yeah, I don't know. Film serials I found interesting, but I've not seen the Superman ones specifically.
No. What I will say is I didn't watch the Kirk Allen serials comprehensively. I looked up a few clips in advance of this episode. I have to say, I think Kirk Allen is a much more appealing Superman based on what I've seen than George Reeves. That's my hot take. And I think the serials bring across the sort of whimsy and the sort of childish joie de vivre of the character a lot more than the Reeves version, who I think comes across as kind of this sort of stern 50s father knows best sort of figure.
very much. The vibe of the Adventures of Superman, which the show does have its charms. I have watched several episodes of it, but he is very much the stern but loving father type figure, except for the whole world instead of just a family.
But something
But
that's
like I said, I have not seen the Kirk Allen serial, so I can't compare and contrast.
Sure. But something that strikes me about these early iterations of the character is there was this sort of give and take between the comics themselves and the adaptations. There's I think Up and Away first showed up in the serials. I think, as far as I'm aware, I think it was a radio drama that originally introduced the character of Perry White, who later migrated into the comics. So there's always been this kind of feedback loop between media.
Yeah, if I remember right, and I'm not 100% sure on this, but I believe Kryptonite was originated in the radio dramas as well.
Oh, interesting.
I'm not 100% sure on that. I would have to actually look it up to be positive, but I believe that is correct.
Oh, cool.
But anyway, so after Superman and the Mole Men, Superman, the TV show continues for 6 seasons, but he doesn't show up in theaters again until all the way in 1978, which I think puts us on more familiar ground for most people who will be listening to this show, and possibly people on this show, I don't know.
Yes.
With Superman the movie.
I have seen this one.
Christopher Reeve, Margot Kidder, Jackie Cooper, Gene Hackman, Marlon Brando.
And the guy who plays Jimmy is the guy who plays Jodie Foster's crush Boris from the original Freaky Friday.
Seriously?
I've never seen the original Freaky Friday.
That's great.
Oh yeah, I just rewatched it. It holds up shockingly well. It has some of the flaws of live action Disney of the 70s, but it was a real delight. And God, who's the mom? Is it Barbara Harris? I don't know. She gives a very, very good performance in that original Freaky Friday.
But are we unanimous? I certainly sort of expect and hope that we are. Best iteration of this character on screen?
Just this particular movie, or just Christopher Reeve in general?
Christopher Reeve in general.
Yeah, I don't think there's a competition. I don't think anyone has come close to Christopher Reeve as combining the whimsy, the seriousness. Looks like Superman.
Yeah.
For one thing, you don't get a lot of 6'3", broad-shouldered, black-haired men with Juilliard educations showing up to audition for Superman. He had to bulk up, but otherwise he basically walked in and was Superman.
Yeah, and it's so impressive, like how he differentiates between Clark Kent and Superman in his performance as well.
Very much so. It is he plays it. It's winking and funny. The movie knows that it's ridiculous, but he commits to it hard. Particularly in the scene in the second movie when he just takes the glasses off and stands up straighter, and he's still dressed in, I think it's a tux at the time or a nice suit, but he just stands up straighter and he just turns into Superman standing there, and it's like, you can almost buy that nobody would notice.
Yeah,
that is an impressive performance, and I think regardless of even the quality of his performance, like he is the icon of when you're thinking of screen Superman, in the same way that Superman is the icon of just superheroes in general, I feel.
Yes. I'm not going to get into who John Byrne is because it's not important, but John Byrne, when complaining about the casting of X-Men, once said that you could strip everybody in Superman the movie naked and throw them in a room, and every single person could point out that's Superman.
that's an interesting read. I like that. Because, like, wasn't famously Hugh Jackman was like 1.5 feet taller than Wolverine was supposed to be?
That's exactly what he was complaining about. Was that Wolverine's supposed to be like 5'4" or something like that, and Hugh Jackman's like 6'2".
Yeah, so there is that. But like even divested of Christopher Reeve's charms, I do think this is sort of the best Superman movie. It nails that sort of very post Star Wars brand of kind of like horny optimism in ways that weirdly feel immune to modern irony and cynicism. I don't know, because like speaking as
I do. I love this movie.
Yeah, 100%. I have my issues with it. I think it's kind of shaggy and loose in terms of its plot, and the actual supervillain scheme is kind of arbitrary. And there is the whole sort of flying around the Earth backwards thing at the end, which is sort of like caused headaches for, like, he's flying faster than light, so he's traveling backwards in time. It doesn't have anything to do with the actual rotation of the Earth. I get that. It still isn't a great plot point. But
no, it's a weird finish but it works. It's Superman and he can do anything. It tends to be the answer.
It's a comic book. It's a cartoon. Like it feels perfectly natural to me that he could just do that, and we don't have to worry about the sign because he's flying because of the yellow sun or whatever. It's just we're existing in a world where these things can just happen.
I didn't even mention Ned Beatty when I was going through the cast, and Ned Beatty is hilarious as Otis.
Well, man, it's
henchman.
Wild to me that this was 2 years after Network. Like that's some range on your actor right there.
Look at the cast. I mean, Reeve was unknown, but you have Gene Hackman, Marlon Brando, Ned Beatty, and Jackie Cooper.
Wild.
And we are not that far removed from Network, but we're not that far removed from The Godfather.
French Connection.
Yeah. Yeah, and was Margot Kidder someone at the time? I mean, obviously she had done Black Christmas, but I don't think that was like number one on her resume.
Yeah, I don't think she was a big star before Superman. Obviously, you and I both love Black Christmas.
Yeah.
But
I feel like in the same way that, Action Comics #1, April 18th, 1938, sort of paved the way for what superhero comics would be moving forward, this movie kind of set the template for all superhero movies to follow. Something I find quite interesting about Superman 78 is that for all that it's sort of adapting the iconography and all the sort of tropes and the standards that you expect from Superman's mythos, it's not really adapting a comic storyline, is it? And that's
no, it is pretty much an original story.
And that's kind of the way that all superhero movies sort of went subsequently, wasn't it? That we're taking the sort of signifiers, we're taking the tropes, we're taking the imagery, but we're also just sort of writing our own sort of 3-act scripts. And I think that's kind of that's an approach to adaptation that we sort of accept as standard over the decades. But it is, I don't know, I feel like that's worth commenting on, that we're not adapting them the way we adapt books.
Yeah, there are some comic book movies that are much more faithful adaptations of specific stories, but most of them aren't superheroes. Like Sin City, 300, Watchmen is a superhero story. But
yeah, no, that's really interesting. I mean, because like it kind of makes sense if you have such a huge tradition of all of his adventures on the small screen, all of his adventures on the comic book pages. There's no way you can really drill down into one single thing and have it feel like the massive idea of what Superman is and what he does. I think it's the same thing when you're like adapting a television series into a movie. You kind of just have to exist in that universe and make a feature-sized story out of all the pieces. But also, I was really interested. You were kind of talking about how it made that template, and there are other movies that kind of were part of big seismic shifts in what the superhero movie was. Like, obviously, the 2000 X-Men, I feel like, really kind of changed what superheroes were in the new millennium.
Definitely.
And then, like, Iron Man changed things for a very long time. But all of them still owe a debt to this original Superman, obviously, because it was so consequential.
100%. It was seismic. So yeah, like almost not quite to the same extent as Star Wars, but it is very much like a part of the landscape of popcorn cinema today. And
Yeah,
just,
and we're 1 year removed from Star Wars. That's it.
yeah, that's it.
Right.
With a lot of the same talent involved, for that matter. And I don't know, I think that's just regardless of where you stand on sort of the aesthetics or the politics of this kind of storytelling, it's worth commenting on. It's like it's academically interesting to sort of trace the evolution of this character on screen, which I guess is my sort of my way into this episode.
So before we get too bogged down in the 1978 movie, it's a masterpiece. Watch it. It was written, by the way, by Mario Puzo, but he didn't write one movie.
I don't think I knew that either.
He did not write one Superman movie. He wrote 2 Superman movies. And Richard Donner directed all of Superman the movie, but every scene that took place in sets that were in both films were directed at the same time. So he had directed about between a third and a half of Superman 2 before Superman the movie came out. And then he was fired by the producers, the Salkins. And Richard Lester, who is probably best known for directing A Hard Day's Night and Help,
which obviously would be prerequisites, I would say, to make Superman 2.
Exactly. You'd want to work on Superman. The guy who made the silly Beatles movies, which are great. That's not an insult to those 2 movies. Especially A Hard Day's Night is a legitimate all-time great movie. So he comes on and he finishes Superman 2, reshoots some stuff, shoots some new material, some rewrites. They had to come up with a new ending because they took the ending that was supposed to in the second movie and put it at the end of the first movie, which is where we get the magic kiss. But this steps up in one big way from Superman the movie. And it's the first time we have a super-powered supervillain in a feature-length Superman movie. Terrence Stamp as General Zod. And there are a lot of people who like Superman 2 more than Superman the movie. I'm not one of them, but I do understand there is a lot more action. It's the first major Superman fight with what were then modern special effects.
Still holds up pretty well, I feel.
Yeah, it does tend to have a goofier tone in places. You can definitely feel Richard Lester's influence. There's some scenes that are just silly. Although you get more of that in Superman 3 even. But it is still a very good movie. I do like it a lot. There was, in 2006, as part of the hype for Superman Returns, they let Richard Donner produce a more or less finished cut of the movie that uses a combination of the footage that's in the movie, footage he shot that was cut from the movie, and even some footage from the original test screenings of Christopher Reeve and Margot Kidder.
Oh, wow.
To create something that at least resembles the movie he was attempting to make in 1980.
See, I don't think I've seen this reassembled cut. I've seen Superman 2. I've seen all the live action Superman, but I don't think I've seen this reworked version. How does it hold up?
Some of it you can definitely tell this is not footage from the same shoot, because in the test screen footage, Christopher Reeve is about 25 pounds lighter of muscle. But I do think it's the superior cut of the film overall.
Okay.
And it definitely makes me wish we'd gotten to see a finished version from 1981 as opposed to Richard Lester's version. But c'est la vie.
C'est la vie. That's showbiz, baby. I like Superman 2 well enough. I do think it's a step down. I think it has some really um questionable elements, like the cellophane S that gets thrown.
Yeah, I don't know what that is.
That's baffling beat. But all in all, it still sort of feels part of the same register of campy fun as the first film. And then we kind of go off a cliff.
Yeah, I do feel like Gene Hackman feels, as Lex Luthor feels, almost vestigial in
Yeah, he
Superman
does.
2. Like,
Yeah.
I don't think it needed him to escape prison and be involved in the plot. But yes, we then do indeed. We drive off a cliff for several years. Starting in 1983, Richard Lester comes back and directs Superman 3.
I think Superman 3 gets off. Superman 3 historically has gotten off easy, specifically and only because it is followed by Superman 4.
But we have Richard Pryor, who. Richard Pryor is one of the funniest men who has ever lived.
Mhm.
Richard Pryor was not made for PG or G rated family entertainment. And this movie shows that very, very well.
Yeah.
This is not his element. And then it has a villain whose name Ross Webster. That's his name.
Yeah.
Which I do believe, to the best of my knowledge, was a completely original character.
He's essentially playing like a less charismatic version of Lex Luthor. Like he's filling that same sort of position in the script.
Without going too deep into the comics, right around about a year and a half later, Luthor would be really significantly retooled as part of DC's post-crisis universe into more of an evil businessman than a evil mad scientist, which is what the original version of the character really was. And this almost feels like a proto version of that, except if Lex Luthor was extremely boring. Now, this movie is not good. It is goofy. It leans very heavily into Richard Lester's love of slapstick and randomness, which works great around the Beatles, less so around the Man of Steel.
Yeah. My two abiding memories of this film are the good Superman versus evil Superman fight, where we have a while where Superman's been corrupted by some variation of kryptonite, and he spends his time getting drunk in a bar and committing random petty acts of vandalism, which is
such as straightening the Eiffel or the Leaning Tower of Pisa.
Yeah.
That's very fun. I've not seen this movie. That actually sounds pretty good. And as someone who enjoys,
is actually very funny.
Yeah, and I do enjoy the emo Tobey Maguire bit of Spider-Man 3, so that does kind of feel of a piece.
It does
this
feel
is kind of a forerunner to that.
Yeah.
I never put that together in my head till you said that in context. But it is sort of a forerunner to emo Peter and Spider-Man 3.
It really is, actually, yeah. And the other thing is, apparently a scene that traumatized a generation of children was the scene where the villain's underling, his main henchwoman, gets metamorphosized into like a robot by the supercomputer.
Because we didn't mention Richard Pryor's character is a computer genius. Because that is clearly the role you cast Richard Pryor for. Computer nerd.
Yeah. Something that I've always resented Superman 3 for is it made the second season of Ghost in the Shell standalone complex worse for me. There's a whole plot beat in that season of that show where the villain is essentially financing his terrorist operation by siphoning off like fractions of a cent being
the
accrued.
Office Space thing.
Yeah, and I thought when I watched that was a really cool and urbane and like intelligent villainous plot, and then I realized it was taken from Richard Pryor in Superman 3. It's like, oh man, that really takes the luster off like the villain of Ghost in the Shell.
Yeah, and I feel like Ghost in the Shell, like I feel like Japan has more of an abiding interest in Superman 3 than Office Space, if I had to guess.
Maybe.
As far as American imports?
Probably. In 1984, we had a movie that is even worse than Superman 3.
Oh, Supergirl!
A movie so bad that after he read the script, Christopher Reeve refused to have a cameo in it. And yes, it is Supergirl, starring Helen Slater.
I have also not seen this one, but this is the one that I am going to see next out of any Superman-related movie.
Oh, Brennan, you're going to love it. It's terrible.
Let me say two things. Let me say two things about it, which are basically what Andrew just said. It is the worst Superman-related film I have ever seen, and I love it. It is so bad. It is so campy. It is so cheesy.
It's demented. Wild.
Yeah, I've heard lovely, wild things. And also, I saw just now, Mark McClure does come back as Jimmy Olsen. That's wild.
Faye Dunaway is in it.
See, I'm sold. And
Mia Farrow is in it. Peter O'Toole is in it. This cast should not have been capable of making a movie this bad.
No, and it's funny because that's your argument, and my argument is like Hart Bochner is in it. He was in Terror Train. He was in Die Hard. I'm very interested in what Hart Bochner has to say.
It's hard to even explain the plot. It involves an evil witch who wants Kryptonian technology.
Why? I mean, why not?
And she is just a witch. Like that she's just somebody who exists on Earth. It's entirely independent of the whole Kryptonian mythology, played by Faye Dunaway. She's essentially playing it as like, what's her face from Sunset Boulevard? That's the sort of energy that she's channeling. Norma Desmond. She's like essentially channeling Norma Desmond for the part. Great.
Except as an evil witch fighting Supergirl.
Yeah. God, so many network alumni in the Superman Donnerverse.
It's a hell of an experience to watch Supergirl.
So, do we want to address Superman 4?
The Quest for Peace.
The Quest for Peace.
Now, one thing that's interesting is Christopher Reeve had just refused 2 years earlier, really, to be in Supergirl because the script was so bad. He co-wrote Superman 4, The Quest for Peace.
Oh, no.
I loved Christopher Reeve. He had no leg to stand on in refusing to be in that other movie. Because this script is horrific. It starts with Superman rounding up every nuclear weapon on Earth and throwing it at the sun.
And all the countries are just kind of fine with this, aren't they? Something like that?
Pretty much. Like, nobody really puts up much of a fight. I believe they might even cheer him. I did not rewatch this movie. But Lex Luthor, because Gene Hackman does come back because he must have needed to buy a car or something. And he uses the combination of this nuclear explosion in space, a hair of Superman he stole from a museum that was using it to hold up a giant weight, and some scientific mumbo-jumbo to create, essentially, Atom Man. I can't remember what he's actually called, but the Nuclear Man, I think it's called.
Atom Man, our favorite character from the film serials.
Yeah. Let me get the right name of the character here. Nuclear Man,
yes.
Played by a guy named Mark Pillow, who does not have a Wikipedia entry, but looks an awful lot like the wrestler Lex Luger.
So, I swear, I've been trying to find a source for this anecdote, so please, somebody, if I'm remembering this wrong, correct me. But I remember when this movie was new, I read that there was apparently supposed to be a promotional tour where Christopher Reeve and Mark Pillow were showing up in costume to promote the premiere of Superman 4: The Quest for Peace. And one of these events, Mark Pillow showed up, but Christopher Reeve did not. And I think it was actually at an event with the British royal family in tow. And like, if you just picture this, because if you've got Superman, like the beloved actor Christopher Reeve as Superman in costume, together with Mark Pillow in costume as Nuclear Man, that sort of makes sense in context. But Mark Pillow as Nuclear Man in isolation, without Christopher Reeve present, like at an event with, the landed gentry of the British Isles in tow, I must feel so bad for the guy. He must have been
He's just a muscular idiot in a bad costume.
Exactly. Just standing alone in this sort of cocktail reception. I just love that.
I cannot tell you anything else about Mark Pillow.
I love that image so much.
But while we're talking about the Apocrypha of Superman 4, another movie I have not seen, but one reason I could have seen it in a different universe is that Wes Craven almost directed that movie. And if he had, I would definitely have seen it because I've seen every movie he made that has come out in
Get
theaters.
out. That's wild. I had
Yeah, was
no
it
idea.
That
still-
was directed by Shalom Joseph Fury,
Sure.
aka Sidney J. Fury,
Huh.
who also directed nothing I've heard of.
But yeah,
Although
I mean,
he did direct a Michael Caine movie that won a BAFTA award for Outstanding British Film.
oh, good for him.
Ipcress File.
I've heard of that.
Oh, the Epcrest file, yeah, that's a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
It's the director of that 22 years later.
Oh.
So they love a storied British director for this franchise. Yeah, Wes Craven was not more than half a decade away from directing Swamp Thing, which I think is how he got into the conversation. Probably.
Well, I hadn't thought of that because I have seen Swamp Thing.
Yeah, it's not like it's a great calling card. I guess it makes sense why he did not get the job, but yeah.
I'm trying to remember what year Swamp Thing came out.
82, baby.
82. So, because I know it came out, bombed. Then the Alan Moore Swamp Thing comic run started, got really popular, and people were like, we should do another Swamp Thing movie. And they made The Return of Swamp Thing. And
Yeah.
they should not have made another Swamp Thing movie.
Well, they shouldn't. I mean, Jim Wynorski directed that one, and I don't think he's directed a good movie that isn't Chopping Mall.
Shame.
And that's for a specific definition of good movie there.
But then we're really into hiatus for like the better part of 2 decades after that, aren't we?
I was thinking about this. It has to be because of what happened to Christopher Reeve, right? Like you couldn't just bring that character back. It
Well-
would have been grim.
Partially, but more we were in development now.
Okay.
After Tim Burton made Batman and Batman Returns, he was attached to make a movie called Superman Lives that floated in development hell for a decade plus. At one point, Kevin Smith wrote a script before Tim Burton came aboard, which they threw in the trash when Tim Burton did.
Yeah, this was the origin, was it not, for Nicolas Cage's cameo in The Flash
Correct.
a couple of
It
years
was,
ago.
when it was Tim Burton, it was going to be Nick Cage as Superman, which, if you guys know anything about Nick Cage, huge comic book fan. He took the name Cage from the character Luke Cage. He had a massive comic book collection that Lisa Marie Presley made him sell when they got married. I guess his Elvis collection was more important than his comic book collection. But it bounced around. That eventually died off, and Burton went and did other things. And for a while, there was a movie called Superman vs. Batman in development that Christopher Reeve actually squashed. Is he said, nobody wants to see those two characters fight. Why would you put them on the screen as enemies? Christopher Reeve was a smart man. But in the early to mid 2000s, Warner Brothers had an ambitious plan that they were going to monetize their big 3 comic book characters. They were going to do a Batman movie in 2004, a Superman movie in 2005, Wonder Woman in 2006, Batman again in 2007, so on and so forth. The Batman trilogy happened. Superman finally made it back to the screen, directed by Bryan Singer, in a direct sequel to Superman 2, or actually kind of a direct sequel to the Donner cut of Superman 2.
Yeah.
Called Superman Returns, starring Brandon Routh as Superman. And just in case Bryan Singer doesn't make it enough,
Kevin
starring
Spacey.
Kevin Spacey as Lex Luthor.
So
Other than that, I actually like the movie quite a bit. Oddly enough, it is. I once heard somebody, I don't remember who described it as the art house version of a Superman movie.
yeah,
Is that it's a movie that's not really about superpowers. In a large degree, it's a movie about what happens when the guy you loved, who went away, comes back after several years. And you've moved on, except you kind of still love him more.
So Celine Song would have been a good choice.
Would have been less disgusting than Bryan Singer.
yeah, true.
Yeah, probably.
I don't know. This
Although
is actually the
at the time and as a
Right.
kid and also before all of the information came out, like he was the reason I watched that movie because I loved those first 2 X-Men movies.
And he'd also
it probably-
done Usual Suspects at that point. He had done Apt Pupil, which
I had not seen Apt Pupil in 2006 as a sixth grader, but yes, he had
That is
quite
fair.
a yeah.
At that point in time, Bryan Singer was unquestionably a big name director on the rise.
Mm-hmm.
Superman Returns dented that a lot. It opened very big, and it dropped like a rock at the box office.
a theme that we will return to.
Yeah.
It killed the whole plan of getting the whole Trinity on screen one after another, as well as a disagreement between Warner Brothers and Joss Whedon about if the Link script is real, terrible Wonder Woman script. And I say this as somebody who really likes Joss Whedon's work. And also, he's nowhere near the grossest person in this segment of the podcast.
So, I think my experience here is kind of aligned with Brennan's. This is actually the first movie we've talked about so far that I saw in a theater. So we've actually caught up to...
me too, actually.
Yeah, so we've kind of caught up to sort of... So, yeah, I would have seen this when I was 15, which... I remember thinking it was pretty boring, to be honest. I've not watched it since 2006. I just remember it being kind of Superman is a deadbeat dad who lifts progressively heavier stuff for 2.5 hours. I don't know.
That's not an unfair read on the movie. You are far from the only person to find it boring.
Yeah.
Except I really liked it. I saw it twice in theaters, but I don't think I've watched it in 15-ish years now. So I'm not like I'm sitting here going, yes, definitely go out and watch it right now. But I did, at the time at least, very much enjoy it.
Yeah. I do really like the shot where the bullet pancakes itself against the guy's eye. That's a great shot.
Yes, that is a great shot. And it is interesting that it goes back to what the first Superman the movie did. First being the first Christopher Reeve movie. There's not a single punch thrown in the movie by Superman.
Oh, that's fascinating. I didn't realize that.
He gets beat up a bit after he gets on that Kryptonite Island thing that Lex Luthor creates. But he does not ever throw a punch at any point in the movie. They had intended a sequel, with one of the writers was going around right after the movie opened wearing a t-shirt that just said "Kneel before Zod." So by all accounts, they intended to bring back Zod for the second movie. But as I said, it dropped like a rock at the box office in its second weekend. There was no second movie.
Yeah. I think that's sort of interesting to note, isn't it? That I think almost since the 70s, Superman has never really been that big a box office draw. Certainly not to the extent that Batman is.
There's no question Batman's a more popular character. He sells more comic books, sells way more movie tickets, sells more merchandise. At some point in probably the 80s, Batman really moved to the top of these superhero charts and has not, other than occasionally Spider-Man taking over, has pretty much been the most popular superhero character.
Yeah, but it kind of feels like Superman kind of has to persist regardless because of what we said at the top of the episode, where, he is the guy you draw if you draw a generic superhero. So even if he's not necessarily, the biggest, even if he's not in the zeitgeist, he still has to kind of persist and be a constant.
And in one of the things that's mentioned in Superman Returns that I think becomes the theme for the rest of Superman movies up to this point is the idea that Superman is passé. There's a line in Superman Returns where Perry White says something to the effect of, does he still fight for truth, justice, and all that? And it really strongly implies that, is this still relevant? And I think that is the question every Superman movie since then has strongly wrestled with, is how do we make this character relevant? How do we make people care about the big blue Boy Scout in the 21st century?
And has anyone answered it?
Well,
I don't know that they have.
Bring us to our next movie.
Because Zack Snyder.
In 2013.
Zack Snyder had
when Zack Snyder's answer was, make him a miserable prick. That was his answer to this question.
Yeah.
Now, I make no secret, I dislike the Zack Snyder DC Universe movies significantly.
Mm-hmm.
I think the first half to 2/3 of Man of Steel are beautiful. I think once the fight with Zod starts, the movie loses all sight of what the hell Superman is. And even I can't remember if it's in Man of Steel or if it's in Batman v Superman, but one of the two, there's a scene where he flies up into space so he can't hear all the people's voices. And Zack Snyder talked about it in an interview where he said, sometimes he can't listen to everything and try to save everybody because it would become just never ending.
Yeah.
And I sat there and went, he fights a never-ending battle for. A never-ending battle for is the whole fucking point of the character of Superman, is he never stops fighting. Literally, the iconic Alex Ross painted prestige format comic book was just called Never-Ending Battle. I hate Zack Snyder's take on Superman.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I skipped Man of Steel. For some reason, I have seen basically the rest of the DCEU for the most part. I don't know why that happened to me, but I never saw Man of Steel. I do think Henry Cavill, speaking of getting people naked in a room, I think he's a great choice for Superman aesthetically. I think he's super hot. I think he's very imposing, and he does feel like a superhuman presence on screen. Physically,
I absolutely believe he could play a good Superman. I believe he could play the whimsy and the playfulness. Like, I always go back to that scene in the one Mission Impossible where he's in the fight and he loads his arms.
Yeah. That famous shot
and
from
that
Fallout.
Is the kind of, I mean, you wouldn't do that in a Superman movie, but that attitude works for Superman. But Zack Snyder's take on Superman is so dour and so miserable that you can't imagine his version of Superman doing anything fun.
Like, I think since we're just dipping in this pool, I am going to skip ahead a tiny bit. You can introduce it in a minute, but Batman versus Superman, which is the first of his that I have seen. I think the scene that most adequately expresses kind of like the kind of tone that Zack Snyder's going for is that part where is it Holly Hunter? She's staring at that like jar of piss in front of her.
Yes. Yes.
And that just feels to me like exactly it is just that franchise distilled into a single image.
I know it has its defenders. I know Tim likes the Snyderverse movies,
and that's great. Tim's not on this episode. Oops.
Right? Yeah, I'm just saying. I'm not here to say everybody who likes them is an idiot. Although I kind of want to say that because I just think it's a fundamental understanding of the character of Superman that I cannot get on board with, which goes back to what I said way back at the beginning of this about why I wanted to talk about Superman. The character is a sacred object to me. Superman is not. There's a quote from, I believe it was Roger Stern who said it, and I'm going to paraphrase it because I don't have it in front of me. But he was asked once why he writes Superman and what his into Superman is, and he said something to the effect of, Superman is not a superhero because of the things he can do. He's a superhero because if I woke up tomorrow morning with all of Superman's powers, I would have a press conference by noon that started with the words, as your new ruler. And I just do not feel in Zack Snyder's version of Superman that selfless, sacrificial figure that, to me, is a character I have loved since I was a small child.
So just to jump on that, because I guess I will sort of be the tenuous, ambivalent voice of apologia for the Snyder Cut, or for the Snyderverse, rather. I remember back in 2013, I was a real Man of Steel apologist. I have cooled on the movie significantly since then, for a lot of the reasons that you outlined, Brian. I think it's philosophically kind of incoherent. I don't think the plot really works ultimately. There's a lot of stuff in that movie that I still really like. I actually do kind of groove with the aesthetic. I like the score. I like a lot of the casting. I think a lot of the action is really cool.
It's gorgeous, the movie. It's jaw-dropping, beautiful at points.
Yeah, I mean, there are people who have sort of reneged against the sort of handheld, like heavily desaturated aesthetic. I actually think it seems quite considered and quite consistent throughout, and I actually appreciate a lot of the editing and a lot of the shot composition. But yeah, I take your point that it's not really... It's not drilling down on the things that make Superman an enduring, iconic figure. And I think that is sort of what works against it ultimately. If it was about some other character, if it was about some, OC Do Not Steal, who was also from another alien planet and had sort of mega punching powers, it would probably be a lot more acceptable.
At the end, would be amazing in a live-action Dragon Ball Z movie.
Yeah, that's exactly. I think it's.
It would need some, Kamehameha and kicking, but otherwise,
I even think that's quite a conscious influence. Like there are shots in Man of Steel that seem like they're drawing on that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, but yeah, but just bouncing off of what Brian said that Andrew was also responding to, I think, like, for me, the whole issue with these new movies, I mean, I dislike when superhero movies try to place the superheroes in a realistic moral universe. I don't think that it is beneficial to superheroes to do that. And so when we are asking these questions of Superman of like, should you be doing this? Why are you doing that? That's not what he's about. He's about that selflessness. He is about like, I have this power and I'm unquestionably using it for the good of humankind. And to question that is to question the foundation of the story and watch it dissolve in your hands like sand. Like it's just such a silly thing to do.
And since we did bring it up already, I'll quickly move into 3 years later, Snyder returned with Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice.
More like Batman v Subpar Man, Yawn of Justice.
Oh my goodness. I mean, the one thing about that movie that I think is worthwhile is the Martha conversation. I think that's one of the funnier things to happen in 2016. But yeah, I do not like that movie.
No, he doubles down on most of his instincts with the character and has an even darker take on Batman, which, Lord help me, can we get a new version of Batman that isn't darker and grittier? Grimmer and grittier and grimmer and grittier. We haven't lightened Batman up since Joel Schumacher. And maybe we don't want to go quite that light. But anyway, this isn't about Batman. We're here to talk about Superman. This movie, I think, is the climax of something that goes back to at least the 1978 Superman movie, possibly longer, which is that of Superman as a Jesus Christ stand-in. There are things... There's a line in Superman the movie where Marlon Brando says, "I've given my only begotten son." Hard to get more on the nose than that. There's a scene in Superman Returns that looks like a crucifixion of Superman. But here we actually have him die and rise again. Or, well, he doesn't rise again until Justice League, but it has been a long building process, which is fascinating because if you go back to 1938, Superman is not a Christ figure. He's Moses.
Yeah, because, I mean, Siegel and Schuster were Jewish, weren't they?
They were. It is a baby sent in a lifeboat, hoping to find a better life as opposed to the coming of death. He is absolutely a Moses figure to lead, not to rule. And I am sick and tired of Christ-like Superman.
Okay.
I want somebody who will go back to the roots of the character, which are in American Judaism. In fact, most Golden and Silver Age superheroes are rooted in American Judaism.
Interesting.
Stan Lee was Jewish. Jack Kirby was Jewish. Jerry Siegel, Joe Shuster. I think Joe Simon is Jewish, although I'm not 100% positive on that. But the vast majority have that is where their roots are. And I mean, I get that the Bible is the most foundational text of Western literature, but I am just sick and tired of Superman. Okay, he's 33.
Yeah, he does explicitly note that, doesn't he?
Snyder does, yes. He is 33 in Man of Steel. And it's like, we get it. He's Christ. Can we move on and do something else with this character?
That's an interesting thing you raise, actually, Brian, because I was actually going to draw a different parallel for Batman v Superman. And this is also not a new observation. This is not being original. But famously, in Batman's origin story, which we see recapitulated once again at the beginning of Batman v Superman, ordinarily he and his parents were coming away from a screening of Zorro when his parents were assassinated. Batman v Superman makes one important change to that part of the mythos, which is they're not coming out of seeing Zorro, they're coming away from seeing John Boorman's Excalibur, which famously is Zack Snyder's favorite movie in real life. And Excalibur imagery is all over Batman v Superman. The final scene, which I guess is kind of a spoiler, but we're kind of past that point now. The battle with Doomsday, where they sort of mutually impale one another. Doomsday gets run through on the kryptonite spear, it's explicitly restating the battle between Arthur and Mordred at the end of Excalibur. And I think Snyder's vision of Superman is not Christ-like or he's Christ-like in Man of Steel. In Batman v Superman, he's Arthur-like. I think that's kind of weirdly insightful in a way, maybe even in ways that Snyder didn't necessarily intend. I was recently reading a book by the comedian David Mitchell, English comedian. Very funny. You should look him up if you haven't. Where he wrote a lineage of English royalty. And he characterized King Arthur as essentially like he's a vision of the medieval kings who's less shit, basically. That's the function that Arthur serves. And that's kind of my grand unifying theory of Superman in a way. Like, Superman is to 20th century liberal democracy what King Arthur was to medieval kingship. Like, here's a version of our leaders if they weren't a bunch of cretinous wankers. Like, here's somebody who actually, wields godlike power equivalent to the nuclear bomb, but is beholden to the rule of law and holds himself to account.
That's I would have to, spend some time thinking on that take because that's new to me. That is an interesting take.
Yeah, that's my read.
No, that's a really interesting read, and I love getting to connect things to like larger themes in literature and in history in general. I will say we've been talking quite long, so we should wrap up with some thoughts on BVS and Justice League. BS, what's up?
I was just going to say I was going to ask about some of the animated Superman movies because I know Andrew watched a couple, but I think we've ran too long for that. Some other time, perhaps.
Yeah, probably. There is a whole like parallel cottage industry of like the DC animated universe movies, which are very badly curated and not very easy to get into as an outsider. But I did watch a couple just as
they're not curated on any service. Yeah,
no, true. But yeah, I did watch a couple just as revision for this episode. Superman versus the Elite and Superman. It was the death of Superman. It was another version of the Doomsday story. Neither of which really clicked for me, I've got to admit. But I don't think I'm really built for those kind of thing.
In one sentence, I'll say why I don't want to get into this in this podcast. I think Superman versus the Elite is the best Superman movie ever made.
Ooh.
Period.
Oh, that's a separate question. Okay. Interesting. We'll need to revisit this at another
I don't want to
juncture.
get into this because that's going to be a whole movie, a whole podcast right there.
Man.
But as I said, I do not care for any of the Snyder verse. I don't really like either cut of Justice League. I think there are things that are better in the absurdly long Snyder cut. I think there are things that are worse in the absurdly long Snyder cut, especially that there's more Ezra Miller's terrible Flash. But you said something that I want to bring into the upcoming James Gunn movie. And I just want to bring in something Grant Morrison wrote in a comic book called All-Star Superman. The first page of All-Star Superman. Doomed planet, desperate scientists, last hope, kindly couple. That's it. That's Superman's origin. That's all you need to know. I do not need an origin story of Superman ever again that is longer than those 8 words.
Amen.
Fair enough.
Absolutely. I'm going to say that I am with you. I'm cautiously optimistic. I'm going to turn up to the new movie on July 11th because, like, as we've been talking about, it's an interesting legacy to trace. Like, regardless of whether, because I'm not a huge superhero comic reader, it's not necessarily a sacred object to me the way it is to you, Brian, but I do find a lot of themes that can be tied together and trends in pop culture that can be tied back to Superman, and I want to be sort of part of that ongoing conversation. So yeah, check back here in 2 weeks, I guess.
Yeah, and I guess I'm morbidly curious about what a James Gunn Superman looks like. The trailer is leaning a little heavy on sarcasm, which I don't like, for Superman. But I'm curious about it. And certainly of the July superhero movies, I would like to see Superman much more than I would like to see the Fantastic Four: First Steps.
Aww. Poor Fantastic Four.
I know. Well,
maybe someday you'll get a good movie.
Mm-hmm. And I say this as like, I mean, as a kid, I saw the original Fantastic Four movies and I liked them both. I'm sure I would have different feelings now, or at least reassess them now. But like, I like the Fantastic Four and I liked those first two movies. And this new one just looks like, it looks like gray mush. It looks like nothing.
That it's a period piece.
Yeah.
I'm out of nice things to say.
Yeah.
I have been arguing that it should be a period piece since the 2005 or whatever year it was movie came out. Like, no, they belong in the 60s.
Yeah.
Now they've done that and it still looks terrible. So we'll see.
And I believe they might have talked about this on the last episode, but I do not mind the gender swap of the Silver Surfer, but I think the wet look that they've given her is really appalling for me to look at with my two human eyeballs.
It just looked like a mirror. Like a shiny silver mirror. But anyway, we're not on a Fantastic Four episode. That would be much more depressing than this episode was.
Oh my God, yes. But yeah, thank you so much for both of you for doing this. I feel very edified. But yes, before we go, is there anywhere you want to point people to find you online or find things that you're doing?
Nothing in particular. You can follow me on Letterboxd or most other social media. I'm Firewall3D.
Great.
That's all I got. I have nothing to plug.
So I will just take a quick opportunity to plug my my own podcast, which is Two Friends Watch. You can find us on twofriendswatch.com. We just recently recorded an episode about the 1924 silent German movie, The Last Laugh, which we both liked quite a bit. Spoiler alert. So check that out when that goes live. And just give us a follow if you like what you hear.
Excellent. And yeah, you can find me on social media, Twitter, Blue Sky, Threads, Instagram, at It's Raining Brens.
Hallelujah.
I am back in the saddle on doing my 1980s slasher reviews, and I post links to those all over there. You can also find me on Letterboxd, find more episodes of this show and others at alternatending.com. And the next episode on the feed that you're going to get is an episode of Bride of Alternate Ending. I believe we are going to be on a very tight schedule. We are doing an emergency episode on Zombies 4, Dawn of the Vampires. So it will depend on...
So excited.
Oh, I'm very excited too, but it might come a little late depending on when we're able to watch it and when we're able to record. But just know that is coming, and it is the event of 2025, for me at least. Anyway, yeah, thank you so much for listening, everybody, and bye-bye!